Okay, Pastor Rick, welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to have you back.
Good to
we
be
were
back.
we were not here for a week. I think I was looking, and this was the first. Last week was the first week that we didn't put out an episode for
yeah.
40-something weeks.
But there was a good excuse. I was with a granddaughter, a brand new granddaughter, Victoria, who was well worth it.
How many does that make for you now?
13. 13.
Okay, lucky 13.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, she's an awesome little thing.
Yep. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
But selfishly, we're glad to have you back.
Thank you.
As always, I have a question for you that I think, or I hope, will be happy to our church or helpful to our church.
Sure.
The topic today is, one of the interesting things about last year with all the COVID stuff going on is I think people had a lot more time on their hands because so many things got canceled. Sports got shut down, kids weren't going to school, everything was closed down. Now that things are ramping back up, I think we're returning to a state that we're more familiar with, which is that state of busyness, where it just seems like every hour of the day is accounted for by something. There's tons of activities. There's work. There's kids in school. There's church activities. There's sports. There's whatever it might be. There's just a lot. I think people oftentimes feel very, very busy, and that can be overwhelming for people. And I think one of the other comments you hear sometimes is people feel so busy that they find it hard to invest in their spiritual life because of the busyness. And it's not that they're necessarily being lazy. It's just that, man, from the moment I get up, I'm working, and boom, boom, boom. The day gets going. How would you encourage someone who just feels overwhelmed by the amount of stuff they have going on, feels like they're busy all the time?
Yeah, it's interesting that what we're talking about is perhaps less time management as it is priority management as we get into issues like this. Mm-hmm. My father had a plaque that he had on his office wall that I remember looking at numbers and numbers of times. And it read, "I have all the time I need to accomplish everything that God intended for me to do today."
Interesting.
And the question is everything you're trying to do aligned with what God intends for you to do on that day?
Right.
Or are you supplementing the things that God intends for you to do with things that either you want to do that is independent of God's will and purpose for your life, or that is being imposed upon you by others or by even a society or a culture in general? I think back at earlier days when you didn't have all the soccer clubs, the basketball, the ballet, the gymnastics, all the different things that society has told you, if you don't expose your children to these, somehow your children are going to be warped and socially backward, or whatever it is that drives a parent to think that, they have that 0.00001% chance of their child being a professional baseball player.
Making it big. But Pastor Rick, my child is the one that's going to make it.
Sound like
mine's going to make it.
The gamble-holic that says, just one more slot, I will hit it rich. Anyway, there are so many things that compete for our time and our attention these days, and I think that we need to really step back and say, okay, what really is essential for me to be successful in fulfilling the will of God for my life and for my family's life? And there are certain things that I think are essential. One is family time. You need to spend time as a family.
Sure.
Not just running everywhere and considering, the time that you spend at the soccer field with all your little ones running around being corrected all the time. And, your one child out playing a sport or whatever it is. Not that I'm against that. I'm a sports lover. I love to go to my grandkids' baseball games and other things. I love doing that. I went to Jack's soccer game the morning I flew back here last Saturday. Awesome. I was in the rain watching my grandson, running around a soccer field, seemingly oblivious to the purpose of the game. But anyway, it was my grandson, so I enjoyed being there seeing that. So I'm not opposed to those things. I just think those things need to be fit in to the essentials, not become the essentials that squeeze out what are essential.
Right.
And I think so. You're really looking not only at the issue of time management, but priority management, and I think that's a big issue.
Yeah.
Second to the family is the church. Time in worship, time in You know, people say, well, Sunday's a family day. No, it's not. Sunday's the Lord's day.
Right. Right.
It's not family day. It's the Lord's day. Saturday's a family day. We live in the luxury of the United States of America, where back in the 1800s or whatever it is, the unions or whoever did it persuaded our culture that we needed a 5-day work week and have 2 days off.
Yeah.
Where God's economy is you have a 6-day work week and 1 day off.
1 day off.
So in America, we have 2 days off. We have an extra day off every week.
Right.
You know, that's not God's economy. God's economy is you work 6 days from sun up to sundown.
Right.
And then you have 1 day to recover.
Right.
And that day is to be spent in worship. So we have Saturday extra.
Yeah.
That becomes the day for family. If you really want to prioritize your family, let it be Saturday.
Right.
And then Sunday is the Lord's day.
Right.
So you don't try to co-op the Lord's day
Right.
for your family
Right.
day. That's not unless your family priority is to spend time together in worship, which then of course I would encourage.
Yeah.
But so we have that ability to prioritize the Lord's day and have not just church but spiritual pursuit, which would include church and fellowship around church. I think that's an essential. Everything else in your life needs to fit in around your family and your spiritual family, the church, including work, hobbies, activities, sporting events, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an old phrase that the most successful people in life have the ability to keep the main thing the main thing.
Right.
And the issue of there's a book written, The Tyranny of the Urgent, where we allow crises after crisis after crisis to identify our priorities for us. And we never have the ability to proactively set a trajectory of what we desire to accomplish because we just live from one crisis to the next. And if we allow ourselves to live that way, become so hectic, to become so paced, frenzied that we don't have any downtime. I'm reminded of where the Lord said to the disciples, "Come apart and rest."
Yeah.
That somebody co-opted that phrase and said, "Come apart and rest, or you'll just flat come apart." Right. So there needs to be that. Another person wrote a book entitled Margins, which was a comparison of a page that's printed. You don't print from the edge of the paper to the edge of the paper. There's a margin of however long or wide that you keep on the page. And in terms of our energy and time, we need to maintain margins so that we're not going from edge to edge, top to bottom, but there's a top, bottom, bottom margin, left margin, right margin that we reserve for more of a downtime. Now we can make rest and leisure an idol. To where we indulge in rest and leisure excessively, which is as bad as being so frenzied and paced out that you don't have any time for the important things. So there needs to be, the rebuke of consider the ant thou sluggard, while at the same time coming back and saying, I need to come apart and rest, as the Lord has indicated. So, that's important. I'm reminded that in this issue, Paul wrote to the Ephesians in Ephesians 5, and he says, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So the most out of the time spans or the epochs or the stages of life, make sure that you're not wasting those opportunities and are maximizing them in the fulfillment of the will of God for your life. We are dictated to in excess by a culture that tells us what we ought to think, what we ought to engage in, what we ought to do.
Right.
And so a family of 3 kids may have 7 different activities or clubs that those kids are involved in.
Right.
And they ferry them from one thing to the other.
Yeah.
And then they drop that one off and they go over and take this other kid to this activity. And then before that kid's done, this one needs to show up at this practice. And, and they're just everywhere. And because you're trying to give your kids as great an opportunity for exposure to activities as you possibly can, because you don't want your kids idle.
Right.
Well, I understand that and I get that. We spent hours upon hours on the basketball court with our kids, baseball fields with our kids, soccer with our kids. And yet we got to a point where we say, okay, this can't run our life. These things cannot run our lives. They have to fit in.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we had established, and it was difficult for our girls, thankfully they were good enough to where the coaches didn't punish them. But we forbade them to play on Sundays. They just weren't permitted. And so the coaches, said, well, we'll take them when we can get them. So that was that was good. Now my kids wanted to play on Sundays, but we said no, it's the Lord's day. We're not gonna engage. That was a personal decision we made. I'm not saying that you're in sin if you do that. I'm not trying to legislate or impose my conscience on anybody. I'm just saying that's what we decided because it was the Lord's day. And the Lord honored that, and our kids prospered, and they thrived on the teams, and they got plenty of playing time, starting and other things. So there was no punitive measures taken. Maybe it's because I was a pastor, I don't know. But I really felt that my children needed to learn the priority of the Lord's day. It's just not another day to fill up with things that our culture says, you need to be doing this in this day. No. That's the Lord's day. We're not going to do that. We're going to spend the Lord's day in a manner that honors the Lord. And we sat down and watched football games together on the Lord's day in the afternoon. But we were always in church, always gathering with the saints, and we always had people over and hosting them and fellowshipping, which is all part of Christian pursuit and virtue and the glory of Christ. So I think it's important that this verse tells us, don't be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. What really is God's will for your family? You say, well, I mean, how am I supposed to know whether or not it's God's will for my kid to play soccer? Well, what is the impact overall on your family? What is the impact on your spiritual health? What spiritual sacrifice are you being called upon to make in order to enable your kid or your family to be involved in this sport? Is it to the detriment of you spiritually? That's what you have to ask yourself. Nobody can tell you that.
It's going to be different for everyone.
As a pastor, I would never come up and say, you have your kid in soccer, that's going to sacrifice your spiritual health. I would never say that. I don't have that ability or right or interest in imposing my conscience on somebody. But I will tell you that you need to ask the question yourself and settle it between you and the Lord, because that's what we're commanded. Don't be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is when it comes to making the most of the time that we have. And I really believe that plaque my dad had really set the tone, that I have all the time I need to accomplish everything that God has intended for me to do today. They'll say, I don't have time. I don't have time to pray. I don't have time to read the Word. Well, yeah, you do, but you've used it for other things. And so
it's an issue of priorities.
Yes, it's a priority management, every bit as much as a time management issue. And I think that's where it really falls.
No, that's really helpful, and I appreciated that question. That's such a good measure of should I do this or not. Is what's the cost? Because there's always going to be a cost. Some costs you can pay. Others are too steep. So that's a really helpful question. No, I appreciate that wisdom. Anything else from you on this topic? That was you kind of answered all my questions. I had a few follow-ups, and you hit them. You checked all the boxes as I was going through. So
that's good.
All right, that makes it easy.
I just want to underscore again that there are times in life, stages of life, where we flex
Sure.
in terms of what we do and
Yeah.
what our priorities are,
Right.
and so on. And you know, I just believe that if we are constantly sensitizing our heart to the Spirit of God and truly yearning
Mm-hmm.
to understand what the will of the Lord is for our family,
Mm-hmm.
that many of the questions answer themselves.
Yeah.
The problem is we get so, just by kind of default, obligated to do certain things because
Sure.
of a societal expectation.
Right. Or
that we
maybe
don't
even our
think-
own desires.
Yeah, we don't think
Yeah.
about whether I should be doing this.
Mhm.
We just assume we should.
Right. Right.
Well, maybe you should
Yeah.
or can, but maybe you shouldn't and
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
And given where you are, all your other kids, what their needs are, and you are not a bad parent if your kid doesn't play soccer.
Right. Right.
That's not what defines being a good or
Right.
bad parent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or any ballet or
Right,
gymnastics
whatever
or
it is,
baseball
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would say, as a general rule of thumb, and this is personal, so
Yeah.
this is a general rule of thumb for
Sure.
Rick and Pat Greger.
This is a Gregorian principle.
We did not impose onto our children interest in sports.
Right. Right.
Our children had to ask us to be able to play.
Yeah. Okay.
If they never asked us, we never pushed them.
Yeah. Sure.
When they asked us, that's when we thought about it and made a decision, talked about it, made a decision whether it would work or not. But we never automatically signed them up and said, you're going to do soccer,
Right.
you're going to do ballet, you're going to do gymnastics.
Right.
We didn't do that.
Right.
Now you say, well, a parent's supposed to direct their children. And there is, but those are not biblically mandated
Right.
things.
Right.
We directed our
Right.
children in biblically mandated
Right.
things. Right?
Right.
And if they had an interest, they had to demonstrate that interest. And then once they started, they were aware you may not quit.
Yeah. I like
So-
it. Right.
If you're going to get involved in soccer,
Right.
you're going to play the season.
Right.
Now, next season's another question.
Sure.
But you're going to play the season. There's
Yeah.
no quitting.
Yeah.
And so we had all those valuations to make before we ever
Yeah.
got started.
Yeah.
But we didn't push our children into
Yeah.
anything, if they didn't show interest in it.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. We have a similar rule. I don't, I love basketball. I'm not going to make my kids play basketball. I'm just going to let them know that if they want dinner, they can play basketball. and that's it. I don't think am I being too harsh?
Set up a hoop in your backyard. Go out and shoot.
Right.
Let them join you shooting.
Right. Yep.
And it kind of naturally develops.
Right. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm kidding, church. I wouldn't do that. I'm kidding. No, that was really helpful, Pastor Rick. I really appreciate that wisdom and just even just the reminder. I think people ask this question wanting kind of that magic bullet of you tell me what to drop, right? You tell me where I can find a few minutes here and there, and I just appreciate how you took it. You took it high level and said, hey, it's about the will of God.
Right.
You know what God desires for you. You know how to seek His will. And like you said, if you're doing those things, it becomes clear. The questions start to answer themselves. So I really appreciate that wisdom. And church, in the interest of time, we'll end this video so that you can
This
have more
is priority management.
No, church, we trust that this has blessed you and helped you, and we do hope to see you on this Lord's Day. And like you said, we want to keep that the highest priority. So we look forward to seeing you all. But we hope that as you're going throughout your week and you're thinking about your time, that these principles will enable you to do that to the glory of Christ. So
Amen.
We'll see you next week on another episode of Living by the Book.
Thanks.